What's going on, everybody? Ian here for Cult of Mac, and if you've been following the channel for a while, you'll no doubt know that I'm a huge fan of the iPad for a ton of different things. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still a place for the Mac in my life. I still use it for video editing and web development stuff, but when the iPad is an option to do things like email or browse the web or research for a post that I'm working on or writing a script for a video, I'll grab the iPad and use that to get tons of stuff done. Now, one critical piece of the iPad as a productivity tool for me is a really good keyboard experience, and more importantly, the ability to quickly shift between using the keyboard on the iPad and interacting with iPadOS itself to get things done quickly as I move around the house or the office. And now with the Magic Keyboard, Apple has actually added yet another option to that. So instead of just switching between keyboard and touch, you can now forget about the touch layer entirely and do everything on the Magic Keyboard itself without ever touching the screen, turning the iPad into more of a laptop than ever before. So here's the deal. For the last week or so, I've been using the new Magic Keyboard with the 2018 12.9-inch iPad Pro, and there are a couple things that really stood out to me. First and most importantly, the keyboard is one of the best iPad keyboards I've ever used. Compared to Apple's older smart keyboards, Zag keyboard cases, or even the Bridge keyboard, the keys feel much better and much more comfortable to type on. They're very sturdy, solid keys, they have great key travel, and a really satisfying click as you type on them, which is to be expected since these are the same keys out of the latest MacBook Pro. With the older smart keyboards, the keys felt fine, but they had kind of this bubble wrap hollow sound when you typed on them, whereas the Magic Keyboard actually has a really nice satisfying click. Now, the texture of the keyboards is actually a little bit different as well, with the older smart keyboards being fabric covered, which help keep dust and debris out of them, whereas this new one is more chiclet style keys where they're exposed and things could get in, which I would normally not be concerned about, but given Apple's track record the last couple of years with keyboards, leaves me a little bit concerned about how it will hold up over time. The other thing that stands out, quite literally, is the stand portion of the Magic Keyboard, and it's very distinctive and something that only Apple would make. Now, in my usage personally, the floating arm has enough angle adjustment to be satisfying for any kind of usage that I would have. Though I've seen others complain online that it's not quite enough, they would like it to tip back a little further. But for me, I found it to be totally comfortable both using at a desk or on my lap for just about any use case. The hinging system on the Magic Keyboard is also super genius by helping hold the iPad a little bit over the center of the iPad instead of all the way to the back, keeping it from tipping over when it's on a desk. But it's not perfect. If you use the iPad Pro in your lap and you start to touch the screen or you let go of the keyboard, especially if you're tilted down at all, the iPad has a tendency to want to kind of topple backwards. And part of that's because of the design of the keyboard case itself, and part of it's the fact that the iPad is much heavier than the keyboard is on its own. Now, the whole system works with a collection of magnets, as many of Apple's products seem to lately, and it holds the iPad in place, allowing you to adjust the angles, tap the screen, and the iPad will stay where it belongs. But at the same time, just a slight tug and you're able to release the iPad from the stand, allowing you to take it on the go to use it as you need without carrying the stand everywhere you go. Weight is another thing that really stands out with the new Magic Keyboard. My iPad Pro, for example, weighs 633 grams. If you add in the 702 grams of the Magic Keyboard, you more than double that overall weight and end up with something about the same as a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Now, for me personally, the added weight is kind of a non-issue. When I'm using the iPad as a laptop, I'm fine having something that weighs the same as a laptop. But then I can also detach the iPad from the keyboard and use it as an ultra-light, ultra-portable computer, and then come back and dock it back into the keyboard and trackpad when I want to really get down to work. And now that I've mentioned it, let's talk about that trackpad. Now, when Apple added cursor support to accessibility in iPadOS 13, I wasn't overly impressed. It felt like a stopgap for a bunch of people who are really begging for a trackpad or cursor on their iPad. But now with the actual official trackpad support and with this Magic Keyboard, it's completely changed things and it feels as native as ever. Basically, the trackpad on the iPad has done to the keyboard what the keyboard did to the iPad. It's made it way more productive and way more useful for a lot of people and made it more accessible to do super powerful things with the convenience of a laptop and the features of iOS. Ultimately, the trackpad itself integrates pretty seamlessly into iPadOS, and much of that is because Apple has really taken the work to make sure that things feel very natural and in place on the iPad, while still maintaining the familiarity of using a trackpad like you'd expect on a Mac or even a PC. Another thing I really like about the trackpad on the Magic Keyboard is the physical click itself, and that's because it is a true physical click. It's something that we haven't seen in a trackpad made by Apple in quite a while, since most of their trackpads now use a haptic click instead. Now, with the actual trackpad itself, you do get a bunch of gestures, which, if you're familiar with the gestures in iPad OS, then it'll feel totally familiar as you use it, and if you're not, you're definitely in for a real treat. I'm not going to go into all those gestures. I'll have a video linked here or down below if that's something you're interested in seeing, but needless to say, there's tons of gestures that make the trackpad really emulate what you can do with your hands on the screen, but with the convenience of the physical trackpad, making it really fast and fluid to kind of navigate around apps and through the OS itself without any difficulty. And now, most of the stuff I've just talked about are really great features of the Magic Keyboard and the iPad Pro. There are a couple things that are not so great about the experience as well. And the first one is for the people who bought that other accessory that Apple also sells for the iPad Pro, the Apple Pencil. When using the Apple Pencil with the new iPad Pro keyboard, it's not a great experience because the angles aren't really conducive for using the iPad. And if you flip it around the other way so the keyboard is sticking up, the iPad tends to want to sag, kind of creating this awkward situation. So ultimately you're left taking the iPad off the physical stand to use the Apple Pencil and then docking it back in again when you want to use the keyboard. Now, for most people, this is probably not an issue because most people probably aren't bouncing back and forth between those two actions all that often. But if you were the type of person who used the pencil, to take notes, but then also switch to the keyboard or the trackpad, that whole process just got a lot more cumbersome. Another point of frustration for me is in the hinge itself and how rigid it is, especially when opening it up. Now, for the most part, once it's open, adjusting the angle is totally fine. You can just grab it and tilt it however you need to get that angle set, for whatever works for you. But when the iPad itself is closed down on the keyboard, getting it open requires two hands. You either have to set it up on the spine and kind of open it down, or set it down flat and use two hands to actually pry it up and open. Now, a lot of this is really just because that hinging mechanism has to be strong enough to hold the iPad, but it is one of those little things that's just not quite as elegant as it is with a MacBook, where you can set it down and with one finger basically open it up without lifting the whole thing off the desk. The final thing that I found kind of frustrating about the Magic Keyboard on the iPad Pro really doesn't have anything to do with the keyboard or the iPad itself, but with iPad OS and the apps that exist on the platform. So the problem is, because Apple has added some new features to the actual OS that allow the keyboard and more specifically the trackpad to work, a lot of those features don't work in certain third-party apps. And that means that instead of using the trackpad and clicking and dragging to select text or flicking away to dismiss an image from the screen, you're stuck reaching up and either touching the screen or learning special keyboard shortcuts to do the same kind of thing, and it's all just a little less simple and a little more confusing. Now, ultimately, that's a problem for right now and something that could definitely be fixed any day with app updates or a software update from Apple, but it's one of those little things that just makes it feel a little bit frustrating and a little bit broken at times, which is not a great place to be on a $1,300 plus computer. So with all that in mind, who is the Magic Keyboard for iPad Pro actually for? If you already have an 11-inch or a 12.9-inch 2018 or 2020 model iPads, you've already invested a ton of money in the actual computer part of it, so the Magic Keyboard actually makes a ton of sense. Yes, it's kind of pricey, but it's a way to really add an extra layer of life and extra functionality and extra convenience to the iPad that makes it even more like a laptop if that's something you're into. And that said, if you're the type of person who does a lot of writing on your iPad, whether it's emails or blog posts or a book, the iPad Pro's Magic Keyboard is really great because the keyboard itself is really, really great and really comfortable to type on. Now, if you use your iPad Pro primarily as a consumption device, the Magic Keyboard makes a lot less sense. Whether you're watching Netflix or YouTube, surfing social media, or even just looking around at stuff on the web, the keyboard itself doesn't add a lot of convenience and in some cases could even get in the way. The same goes for artists who depend on the Apple Pencil to do a lot of their work. The angles and the stand part of the Magic Keyboard are not great for using the Apple Pencil, meaning you're mostly going to be taking it out of that keyboard case anyway. Now, if you're the type of person who uses your iPad Pro for everything, the Magic Keyboard's definitely worth considering. It makes text selection easier, assuming the apps support it. It makes switching between the keyboard and interacting with the actual UI itself super easy because you can quickly move from the keyboard to the trackpad. And ultimately, it just makes it feel more like a laptop when you want, but also gives you the freedom to take it off as a tablet when you want as well. So So it really kind of depends on what your use case is, but ultimately it is a pricey accessory to add some functionality to your iPad. The 11-inch model is $300, the 12.9-inch model is $350, but if you're the type of person who prefers iPad OS and iOS for getting things done over the Mac or Windows, or you want a way to do more with your iPad, it's definitely worth considering. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. While you're down there, be sure to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not already, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads. I'm Ian for Cult of Mac, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.